So the Football League is over, save for four fairly superfluous finals, you'd have to say. But it seems like an appropriate time to take stock of the emerging picture in Gaelic football. Welcome to Indo Sport. Conor McKeon here. We've got Colm Keys in studio. Hi, Colm.
Hi, Conor.
Donnchadh Boyle is here as well. Hi, Donnchadh.
Hey, Conor.
So there's probably a fair bit of rules fatigue around the place, so we're going to ignore that chat, maybe just reference it at the end and lean a little bit more into, I suppose, the emerging picture and what the league has told us about Gaelic football. So yesterday, before the start of the day, I think by consensus, the likeliest Division 1 pairing final was going to be Dublin and Galway. In the end, neither of them made it. Kerry and Mayo, who both spent time, albeit briefly, in the relegation zone over the course of the afternoon, made it to the final. Armagh did what all Ireland champions do. They got their business done without too much angst. Donegal got their business done early and, as predicted, lost their last two games and didn't make a final. Tyrone were relegated despite hammering Dublin and getting 5 points out of their last 3 league games, finishing with 7 points. And Derry just had a bit of a catastrophic league. So what does it all mean, Colm?
Well, it means we've had the most competitive Division 1 in a long, long time. And I think you go a long way back since you had that. And that was probably flagged at the outset that this is a very, very even canvas here. It is very, very level playing field. Obviously, Derry didn't hang with the pack, so to speak. They got dropped. Some of their games, actually, they were quite close. They came back and drew with Galway, obviously, and maybe should have seen out the game against Kerry. That said, for the top team, Mayo, to have 9 points and the relegated team to have 7 points, and they only gone down on a head-to-head, suggests 2 points between 1 and 7. I've never seen that before. There has never been, since the leagues were reformatted in 2008 as a meritocracy in order, there has never been a team to go down with 7 points. So that's how competitive. And there has never been a team to top with 9 either in Division 1. So this was a completely new landscape, which just shows, number one, how competitive it was, and number two, how some teams were really trying to measure their run. I think Donegal went out like a train, as you said, and they beat the last 3 All-Ireland the last 3 All-Ireland champions in their first 3 games: Kerry, Dublin, Kerry, and Armagh. So that was clearly targeted. After that, they were coasting a little bit. I think if they were really intent on getting to a league final, I think they would have beaten Tyrone at home last weekend. Came close to beating Mayo yesterday, obviously. So, as I said, that was unprecedented. Mayo were actually in negative score territory, and as you said, at one stage they were in the relegation zone, as were Kerry. So we've never had anything like that. We've had rounds or leagues before where before the last round you knew who the finalists essentially were. This went right down to the last few minutes. So from that point of view, I know there's a lot of complaints about the league, but it has been a very good competition. Yeah, broadly speaking, I know there's flaws in the timing of the final and the merit of being in a final with the proximity of the championship. But as a competition structure, there's still a lot of basis for it. You can make changes. We can talk about that later on. There are changes perhaps to be made. The 4/8 is very divisible, but there are some changes you can make just to ease the pressure points maybe during it.
Donnchadh, last year, I think most of us came away from Croke Park after the All-Ireland final sort of cautiously optimistic that if we weren't quite entering a new era for Gaelic football, we were definitely at the stage where the All-Ireland conversation wasn't going to be dominated by one county, and that theoretically anyway, Sam Maguire was within the grasp of a greater number of teams than it has been in a long, long time. What happened in the league kind of bears that out, but is that sustainable?
I think it's where we are at the moment. I think we've said it in here before, but Armagh's win was great, obviously, for the county themselves, but it also emboldened anyone else with designs on winning Sam Maguire, who will look at Armagh and go, well, if they can do it, so can we. And I think you're right, the league, the 7 games of the league, off the top tier, where you had probably the 8 best teams in the country all in together. has borne that out. As Colm says, the top team is 9 and one of the relegated teams is 7 points. So that speaks to a very, very even landscape. The one caveat with all of this is how much of it and which parts of it can you believe? Seeing is believing, but it's very strange. Like Donegal probably played their best and most important football in the first 3 rounds, as Colm pointed out. You could argue Tyrone's best game was yesterday. When they had to do it and their backs were up against the wall. And then you qualify that by looking, well, where were Dublin? What was their mindset like? How did they go into it? So we're only going to see, this is all, there's a lot yet to play out, I suppose, in terms of what teams are, or where teams are. I think, like, with the exception of maybe Derry falling off the pace, I'm not sure what else you can absolutely hang your hat on from the league. And you could make an argument for or against a lot of teams in any direction by pulling out parts of a game or result here or there. So there's still an awful lot to play out from it.
Yeah, go on.
Just in relation, has there been a more unlucky team to go down than Tyrone? Because if you go back to the Galway game, there was controversy over that Shane Walsh equaliser in Tuam. So Tyrone get the 2 points that day, and all the results play out afterwards. And it's Armagh that go down then on a head-to-head. That's the difference. So they really are unlucky. And as you said, they've come with a really, really strong run. You have to wonder, had Errigal Kieran not reached the All-Ireland club final, would they actually be in a league final and could potentially be favourites for it. So even though they've gone down, I don't think it's as we see it in those terms. I think they've finished strong. There's a lot of strong elements to them, and they're going to be a dangerous proposition in the Ulster Championship. I'd be sure of that.
Yeah, I was in Armagh yesterday, and there was like almost a kind of a party atmosphere around the Tyrone dressing room. And why wouldn't there be? Like, they get 5 points from their last 3 games, and was there 6 points in the end against Dublin? But they were miles ahead. They were miles better. They were better with the wind. They were better against the wind. Matty Donnelly was brilliant. And they brought Rory Canavan off the bench. He kicked 2 great points into the wind. So there was a sense that the team was going somewhere, versus, say, Dublin, who were really, really poor, and some guys who looked like they were just ready-made to make that step up, particularly against Galway maybe the last day, and the second half against Kerry and Tralee. They didn't look like it there. So, like, again, we're always in danger of reading too much into league games, but if you're a manager that finishes the league well, so like Malachy O'Rourke is, or say Jack O'Connor is, or Kevin McStay is, are they in a happier place now than, say, a Desi Farrell or even Ciara McGeaney?
Well, I still think the 3 most crucial games were the 3 that Donegal played against the All-Ireland champions of the last 3 years in the first 3 rounds that they played, and they won all 3. And I think that has to be perhaps the biggest takeaway from the league in terms of the bigger picture. I think they targeted them, obviously. They went out to lay down a marker, for want of a better word. That's what they did, and they achieved that, and everything then. Jim McGuinness really, really prides, as a manager, takes a lot of pride in the performance in the Ulster Championship, perhaps more so than any other manager in a provincial championship. He sees that as a means to an end straight away, that you win an Ulster title, and okay, it's a stepping stone to something else. He actually doesn't see that. It's a competition in itself that he targets and cherishes and really, really values to win. And I think his record in it would suggest and underline that too. So when they had those 3 teams beaten, their focus was switching to Derry. And while they did almost beat Mayo, I don't think it was a particularly strong performance from Mayo, even though they did what they had to do. But that Donegal got so close with a little bit of the handbrake on. It's as I said, it's been a very, very, very strange league, but a good one.
Donegal Mayo, again, just from personal experience, I was at the Mayo Galway game in Castlebar, and even though it was the second round of the league, I was quite happy to draw a line straight through Mayo after that, because they were so poor, and regardless of the mitigation of who they had to come back, and they looked like they were having trouble wrapping their heads around the league. This is their 3rd league final, Division 1 final in 4 years. It's fair going from a group of players who are sort of forever going through that sort of early season strife of not quite being able to hit the levels that they need to. Versus like Galway that day, you know, they were kind of cock a hoop leaving Castlebar. There was signs that they had just basically continued their form from last year's All Ireland final, and yet it could be Mayo League champions in 2 weeks' time or time next week.
I covered their first round game against Dublin, and I was sort of like, it's kind of more of the same. You know, it's like, pushed Dublin hard for a while, didn't quite get them over the line, and you know, there was all sorts of, you could make excuses for them why they didn't, but you could conflate then the long sort of cloud that hung over Kevin McStay over the close season with the poor start, and then you can quite quickly make a case that it was all unravelling. And as you say, they just come back up, but they are remarkably consistent in that regard, and they have got a little bit better as the league's gone on. And as you say now, very unlikely league finalists, although in fairness to Colm, you sort of flagged that a couple of weeks ago. You could sort of see maybe the last round against Donegal that they could very well be in a position to go into a league final, and that's how it's turned out.
I thought at the time, Donnchadh, when we were here before, obviously you could project for the Donegal, not in the way that it turned out now, but I thought the Derry game was the big one for him, because I wasn't so sure that Galway were going to finish. Dublin-Kerry was a very, very hard finish for Galway, especially if Kerry had their backs to the wall and the threat of relegation, which hasn't happened to them in such a long time. So if you were projecting the games, you would have looked and said there is an opportunity, an avenue here actually. Once they got the draw against Armagh in the second half, with that strong second half back in February, their season was turning. And if you look at Matthew Ruan over the last number of weeks, he's just been fantastic. 16 points from midfield, and in all money 15 points, because I think there's only one 2-pointer there, so he has really, really driven them. They are very, very dependent but on Ryan O'Donoghue, and depending on who he's pitched against, it does, a lot goes through him, and a lot of their more inspiring scores will come from him, even though Jack Carney set himself apart yesterday with 1-3, and he's a really good footballer too. But O'Donoghue provides that spark, and that's something different that Mayo need more of. Mayo need more. They're a little bit structured still say that about them, and they do their thing. They do it very well, and they'll play across the lines and they'll wait for their opportunity. But sometimes maybe they're a little bit too patient and they hit the reverse gear a little bit. But Ruan gets them forward. He gets them going forward, as does Carney and O'Donoghue. So they have a lot of good attributes. And they're not without. They have a strong chance this weekend too, because Kerry have been a little bit hit and miss in this league. Okay, they've finished strong and they've put up big scores against Armagh and Galway, without scoring 2-pointers, which is remarkable in the two games, and the kickers that they haven't scored a 2-pointer to run up 3-24 against Galway. But I don't think Mayo. I think Mayo have a strong chance this weekend.
Yeah, I remember after the 2013 All Ireland hurling final, the replay, the classic replay between Clare and Cork. We were all kind of heralding a new era for hurling, because Limerick were Munster champions and Dublin were Leinster champions, and neither Tip nor Kilkenny had made the semi-finals, and it really felt like there was something new happening. And then the next 2 years, Brian Cody produces 2 different kind of teams to win All Irelands. Is there any fear, Colm, do you think, that we're projecting too much about the new democratic scene at intercounty football level, and Kerry are just going to come like they tend to do in years when everybody's expecting something new to happen and win a league and a championship?
They're in a good position. I think they're better equipped squad-wise than I thought they would be when they lost Killian Burke. There is a perception out there that Kerry are not producing players, and the depth of their reserves it's quite shallow. And obviously retirements, other things, other factors have hit them, but Dylan Gainey's emergence is one strong factor for them. Off the bench, they got a really good return yesterday, 1-6. Tony Brosnan, bit of spark about him. Killian Spillane seems to be in the Kevin McMenamin mould. He is better coming off, and he's always contributing. And the player that really struck me yesterday in Galway was Joe O'Connor, the industry he brought around midfield. Big pressure on the Kerry midfield. in that it's seen as a vulnerability. Diarmuid O'Connor is out now with a shoulder injury, short term according to Jack O'Connor. So Joe O'Connor, 3 O'Connors in the one sentence, Joe O'Connor really shouldered it yesterday. He drove them forward, he won kickouts and he got back some of his industry to tackle back. So he's a really strong emerging player too that can play a big role for them. They look well equipped too with the new rules. That space that's there that maybe we can't see, but the likes of David Clifford can sense it. And there was a sense yesterday that, David Clifford was well held by Johnny McGrath. He still scored 2 points from play and a free, but critically was involved in the setting up of 6 scores directly, 6 points directly, 1 a free, and he had an involvement in 2 of the 3 goals as well. Just subtle hand passes that he knows he's drawn players, and defenders are coming to him, and he's able, once he can pop off the pass, the runner is in space and there's freedom there. There's more freedom than there ever was. So Kerry are no doubt about it benefiting from that extra space that the 4v3 is providing.
Donnchadh, Dublin were really, really poor yesterday. Easily their worst performance of the league, and they've finished with 3 pretty bad defeats in Ulster across their league programme. For all they were solid, and obviously there was a bit of balls about them really to come back that night in Tralee from 12 points down to do it. You still couldn't quite hang your hat on the players. Maybe not so much say Luke Brannocks and Conor Tyrrells, the fellas who are brand new, but the players who are kind of stepping up into the leadership roles with so many of their, I suppose, leaders from the last couple of years retiring now. It's hard to build a solid case for Dublin.
You're right in what you say, but on the other side of looking at it is that because they had so many holes to fill and such a rebuild to undertake, that you could say that they actually put together a really impressive body of work over the course of the league campaign by managing to stay up. They went into the last round of the league with a chance of going to a league final. They have sort of, I wouldn't say they found any stars, but they are a very, very compact, smart, efficient unit. And they were in beating Galway a couple of weeks ago. That was everything Galway Wharton, and Galway obviously in that sense had a far more experienced team, been to a couple of All-Ireland finals, and a lot of the Dublin fellas who played that night. So I think Dessie Farrell might be quietly happy enough with the work he's done when you consider what he's had to do. I think maybe Theo Clancy is the bits I've seen. I've been pretty impressed with him. Brannock, I think he has really got something, and Bugler, I suppose, is one of those leadership roles you're talking about now as well, and he looks like one of the senior men in there. So I think, yeah, it finished up on a bit of a whimper, but when we were talking about Dublin and we were like the early part of the year, they had no Fenton, no McCarthy, they weren't going to have the Coola lads. Mick Fitzsimons retired. There was a bit of mystery around Cluxton until the first round of the league. I think if you rewind to that and you come to where we are today and the ground they've covered and the people they've covered it with, I think they've done pretty well this league.
Yeah, they've done pretty well, Colm, but again, back to that question, like for so long we considered Dublin automatic favourites or second favourites for the All-Ireland. Could you say definitively that they're part of that All-Ireland pack?
No doubt.
Yeah.
Because of how level the playing field is, I don't think there's any doubt that Dublin will pull together a team that will really, really challenge, even without Brian Fenton. He's the biggest loss for me all the time. He's the biggest loss. I won't say the rest are replaceable. That would not be. But Fenton drew attention from opponents.
And Con Kilpatrick and Brian Kennedy went to town yesterday against Dublin. They do have an issue there in midfield. It's not just the absence of Fenton, it's the absence of a viable alternative, I think, too, as well.
Yeah, and Fenton just had that presence, and that he just drew opponents to him. Like opponents last year set their targets around Fenton, whether it was Donegal McHugh in the Mayo game or John Maher. And that's been happening almost throughout his career, that opponents come out and say, right, Fenton, we have to deal with that. So he's a considerable loss. Obviously, Jack McCaffrey off the bench, James McCarthy leadership, we can go through them all. But there's still the basis of a very, very strong team there. And without a dominant team, and Kerry are not a dominant team, they have a lot of elements that will certainly point to last four again. They have the route through Munster. They have the extra game now. They have the players to come back. Tom O'Sullivan, Diarmuid O'Connor. They've plenty going for them. but they're not out ahead. There's no team. There isn't a team out ahead. There is still room for another Armagh, another break there. Personally, I think it'll be Donegal. And Dublin and Kerry are both in that mix.
And I think too, it's important. Like Dublin are more comfortable and better in Croke Park, and any major championship game is going to be played there, and I think that really works in their favour.
Yeah, most of their games. I think we can draw a line. I think still through Leinster, Dublin are going to be Leinster champions, and are going to be the number one seeds and have a home game first, and then they're going to be down the country somewhere, depending on the draw in the round robin. 2 games out of Croke Park. That'll be a measure of them in light of the performances in Ulster in this league for a new team to see how do they cope on the road. That will be interesting. And it could be that maybe they only finish second in a group, depending on who it is. That could be that's a possibility this year, that they do not dominate their group like they did the first year of this round robin day. And they topped the group last year, obviously, by getting that late draw against Mayo. May not happen this year. And that could be a 3rd game out of Croke Park. Although, they'd have the home venue then, and obviously it would be Croke Park. But in the extra game, it may be a different route for them this year. But I think the more games they pull together, the more they will develop and mould as a team. And I still see them right there. There's not enough reasons, in spite of what you're saying about Tyrone yesterday. And as Donnchadh points out, most of their games will be in Croke Park, and even if it's a preliminary quarter-final or an All-Ireland quarter-final, it's going to be in Croke Park.
They obviously face a different kind of, next 4 or 5 weeks to, say, any of the Ulster teams. Like Armagh are All-Ireland champions, and they're going into the Ulster Championship without a huge, honestly, there's probably more talk about Donegal than there is about Armagh. And the expectation is that Armagh will maybe sort of not find the level, but they might not kick on, particularly without Rian O'Neill, particularly maybe without the, with the change in the rule around the goalkeeper, where Ethan Rafferty looked like he was going to be the main guy there. They might go back to playing Hughes now. It's hard to say where other than you see somebody like Oisin Connaughty, who looked a little bit as good as he was last year, maybe a bit one-dimensional. Now he seems to have developed a lot, and the players are developing as footballers as well. But where do you see their kind of stimulus to improve from last year?
I suppose if in classic GAA psychology, if you had to guess what was being said in the Armagh dressing room, it might be, well, we're not getting any credit for winning this All-Ireland. And like managers and players look for all sorts of stuff to hang on to. Some of it is imagined. But, the people like I could imagine, it doesn't take a huge leap to get to the place where they would say that they were being slighted as All-Ireland champions, didn't get the respect you get. Because we've all done the interviews and sat in rooms with managers, and they've said, like, you wrote us off, and you're genuinely perplexed and confused by the comment, because you're there like, who exactly did this and when did they do it? So I'd imagine that might be form part of the motivation, but they are, like, we're kind of repeating ourselves to an extent, but they are absolutely in the shake-up again. Like, there are 6 teams that you could make, 7 teams that you could make a decent case for. And Armagh are part of that. Where they improve, look, I think Rian O'Neill he's a marquee player and produced big moments for Armagh in the past. And when those big moments come again, I think they'll miss him then. But they're more than good enough to go deep into the championship again, even without him. But it's going to be small things, and O'Neill might be the small thing that derails them when it comes to it.
I think they'll add more pace to their team. I think you'll see Ross McQuillan starting. I mean, he can really travel. Possibly a player like Darragh McMullen that can really get around. They will change their team, and are changing their team in accordance with the new rules, and they are adapting to that, and they will pick a different team. And I think we will see a different Armagh team to what won the All-Ireland title last year. I just think there'll be that level of adaptation. They have pace. They're a really athletic team, and that gives them every opportunity of going a long way again and again back to Croke Park. They can really cover the ground, Armagh, as a team. Supremely athletic, and players, as I said, like McMullen, McQuillan, are going to make a difference.
Colm, you were in Salt Hill yesterday, and I suppose one of the themes of the league was that Pádraig Joyce was very adamant and very open early in the competition that he wanted to win the league, and now they didn't because they lost yesterday. Damien Conway came back against Dublin. He was brilliant, seemed to be a little bit more subdued yesterday, and there was sort of some worrying news or some sort of some cautious news around Shane Walsh, who had a back injury and couldn't play. They're probably a little bit unlike Armagh, and that we're not expecting a huge turnover to the team that was in last year's All-Ireland final. So, like, how much of a setback was not making the league final, do you think?
Well, Pádraig Joyce has probably targeted being in a league final every year. He respects the competition in that regard. He sees, the history of it and things like that in a way that maybe not every other manager would see it. And obviously, he has name-checked his late uncle Billy, who won a league title the last time Galway won it too. So that means a lot, obviously, to him. Not a big setback. Conor, really not a big setback. The performances against Dublin and Kerry will be more troubling than anything that they have tapered off a little bit. They could have. It wouldn't have impacted on their schedule, even though they're going to New York. Not the biggest setback, but there wasn't much spark about them. They came just after half time. They found themselves 7 down, brought it back to 1. Matthew Tierney was good. Very, very good for them. He looked strong and imposing, took his goal very well. In the past, you would say that Matthew Tierney reserves his best performances for teams against teams in lower divisions. But I have to say, yesterday against Kerry, he looked really strong and forceful in everything he did. So that's a good sign for them. Obviously, Walsh wasn't there. Walsh has probably been their player of the league, no doubt. With the 2 pointers, he's adapted to that really well. So probably few issues in defence, I would think, that they still maybe not sure. Sean Fitzgerald didn't play yesterday, a bit of a loss for him now. He's adapted well. So setting out their defence, I think, is key. Do they put John Daly back in at centre back and play it a different way and use his kicking game? I think there's a few issues to iron out prior to the championship in defence for them more than anywhere.
What about in front of goal, Colm? Because I covered them against Dublin in Croke Park, and they had an appalling night. It was a lot like the All-Ireland final, actually. They kind of kicked it away. So what were they like in that regard? Well,
Tierney took his goal brilliantly. Great strike. They didn't really... Kerry had probably more goal chances. Galway were a little bit open like that. They weren't that profligate, really. Either team were pretty economic. And as the scoreline would suggest, 324 to 219... it's a pretty decent return from both. So economy-wise, I wouldn't have said the issue was with the forwards or the shooting or the striking in any way. It was more defensive, and I think every team is grappling with defensive realignment with the rules and trying to, there is space there, and the good forwards are really starting to find the space too.
Well, that's why I was sort of perplexed by Galway's performance. 19 shots they missed against Dublin, and as you say, good forwards are hitting those straps. At this stage, and Galway have lots of them, but for some reason had really poor. Like Shane Walsh missed a 25-metre free that night. They missed an open goal. It was really bizarre, and it was just. But you can forgive anyone an off night, but when they did it, the All-Ireland final, and did it in Croke Park again, you were there like, you just take a second look at it.
You were in Inniskeen, Donnchadh yesterday. Fair play to you. You covered the ground. Did you walk or did you?
Could be all of 15 minutes from the house.
For all the talk about Division 2, Division 2 was kind of the thinking man's division earlier on in the league, when people were talking about that's where the real football happens. But we've ended up with the same 2 teams who went down last year, Monaghan and Roscommon, going straight back up. Meath, who you saw yesterday, were very well placed after 4 rounds, and then lost the last 2 games. Lost pretty comprehensively in your game yesterday to Louth, who, after like 100 years of not being able to beat Meath, have strung quite a few victories over them over the last little while. What's your overall sort of read on Division 2? Usually when the teams that come down go straight back up, it tends to tell a story about the general strength of Division 2 beneath those kind of couple of teams who are in the...
there's a top 10 or something. Yeah, there is that. Yeah, like, look, I think if you went to that game and you didn't know who was threatened with relegation, you didn't know who was in line for promotion, you would guess that Louth were the team chasing promotion on the evidence of yesterday. They won by 5 points when they played in the championship in Inniskeen last year. Louth won by 10 points. I think both margins flattered Meath on both occasions. Meath got it back to 4, went to 11 down at half stage. Now the wind was huge, massive.
Yeah, all the games this weekend was like a throwback to the start of the league, wasn't it? That there was a scoring half and a non-scoring half.
Yeah, it was funny because Tommy Dornan, the Loud midfielder, actually plays his club football within Inniskeen. So this was his home venue, if you like. He was standing captain for the day because Samuel Roy was injured, and Dornan opted to play with the wind. So some teams, they like to go and dig in for the first 35 minutes and make life as hard as you can, and then you have a target to aim at, and momentum hopefully will carry you home. But they played with it, and they were brilliant. I think they had 5 2-pointers in the first half from playing from frees, and even though 11 points with the wind was far from insurmountable, just the feel of the place was that Meath didn't have it, and they had dropped. I think they had 4 wides and 8 short in the first half, and even allowing for the wind. That was a lot. There was a lot of just bad decisions and poor execution from Meath. And as I say, they got it back to 4 points, and Loud nerves jangled a little bit because there was one stage in the second half, bizarrely, where they were winning by 8 points. But one of the local Loud reporters beside me says, even though this is happening here now in front of me, he says we're still going down because of the way results were everywhere else. So
then we're winning against Monaghan, I think.
Yeah, in running. So, but they were by far the better team. And from a Loud point of view, to do it without Samuel Wright, to do it without their all-star Craig Lennon, to do it without Conor Grimes. I think they had someone said to me they had 8 off the team that started last year in the championship against Meath out the other day. They've handed out 8 league debuts, so I think they were delighted. And it wasn't just the fact that they beat Meath; I think it was the fact that they survived despite everything else that was going on. So they were full deserving value for the win. And then, of course, the salt in the wound for Meath was Jordan Morris getting injured. Who, like, I've seen him a few times, and he's obviously very talented, but like, he looks to have kicked on again. He was by far Meath's best player, probably himself, and probably next on the list was Donald Keoghan. And he went off with what Robbie Brennan said was probably a season-ending injury.
Didn't look good
at the end of the game. So, like, it was just a desperate afternoon for Meath on every level.
The gap between Division 1 and Division 2 is the greatest between
all the divisions,
any of the divisions by some distance.
Yeah.
I think it might actually be greater than it has been for some time, because I'd be sure Tyrone and Derry will just go straight back up next year, and that those body of teams, Cork, Louth, Meath and Cavan, that seem to be just stuck in the middle of Division 2 for an eternity at this stage. I don't think they'll get near either of Tyrone or Derry next year. I suspect Roscommon and Monaghan will find the going tough up there. Monaghan could improve. They're a pacey team, but I think they'll find the going tough in Division 2 and may come back down again. And that's been the nature of it. Difference between 2 and 3, bottom of 2 and 3 is not as great. And even between the bottom of 3 and 4 is not as great. I think there's that Division 1 and that 8 in Division 1. And I think it'll probably surface. Even though Roscommon beat Tyrone in last year's championship, and they're able to get in among them, Roscommon against Mayo and teams like that from time to time, I do think there's just a gap there that we'll see that. I covered a Division 2 game last week between Meath and Monaghan. Just a difference looking at it. In Salthill yesterday, these teams are well ahead.
Yeah, further down the tracks, one of the stories of the league probably has been the Offaly footballers, who were really had a bad year last year, having been within a kick of a Leinster final the previous year, and then they brought in Mickey Harte, and they put him with Declan Kelly, who was already there, and it kind of felt a bit like an arranged marriage. And I don't know how optimistic you are about it, but I secretly, like a lot of people, kind of say, well, this is destined for absolute disaster. And they've put together an absolutely brilliant league.
Well, I probably thought, and I have to admit this, I probably thought this might be a bit like Mick O'Dwyer going to Clare. It's a last port of call or something like that. Completely wrong. Obviously, Mickey Harte he just knows how to run a team. The basics of running a team, how to do things right, how to set it, how to strike the right note in a dressing room about a game. So completely wrong on that. And obviously a decent set of players that some who have All-Ireland Under 20 title from a few years back, and you blend that together with that experience that Mickey Harte has brought. I mean, he won a Division 1 title with Derry last year, having got 2 promotions with Louth, albeit one from Division 4. So you'd expect Louth to get that, and then into Division 3, and obviously, brought them further, and then uprooted and left off to Derry. So look, he knows how to run a team, and brought that experience to Division 3, and it's been a really meaningful arrangement in that respect. Didn't win the game yesterday. Clare have a very good record in Cusack Park, obviously, but they'll be dangerous if it's Meath that come through against Carlow. They'll be dangerous. They obviously beat them in the championship, Meath in the championship 2 years ago, and that prospect is there again for Offaly to kick on into a Leinster semi-final.
Yeah, they'll go up with Kildare Donnchadh, who came out of the blocks with serious intent at the start of the league, and then suffered a couple of defeats that we mightn't have expected. After so many losses, and bad losses over the last couple of years, and sort of coming down a division. Like next year, we're going to have a Division 2 where Meath, Kildare, Louth and Offaly are all going to be. And I think if Westmeath hadn't have been relegated, we'd nearly have a kind of a mini sort of Leinster Division 2. Like, where is the balance of power there? Does it really simply come down to which of those teams are on the far side of the draw to Dublin when it comes to the Leinster Championship? And because Kildare are they what we're looking at for the most likely team to, if not challenge Dublin for a Leinster title,
best of the rest,
get to the final? Yeah.
Well, I suppose what Offaly and Kildare have going for them at this moment in time is that they're both on an upward trajectory. Like Mickey Harte came in and undoubtedly he's done a good job, but in some ways the only way was up for Offaly. They were beaten by London last year in the Tailteann Cup, and they weren't beaten. They weren't like a 73rd minute flick of the ball to the net. They're beaten by 20 to 12 points. They're beaten out the gate, and Kildare somehow from something like 18 months on from beating Dublin in the league and Newbridge to great scenes on the Glen Ryan, that project sort of fell apart and they were relegated from Division 2 last year. So they are starting from a low base, and sometimes, particularly for a new manager or a new management team, that's a good thing because you can generate a bit of momentum and a bit of good feeling and all that. And Offaly and Kildare are in that place. Like Westmeath weren't as bad as the results suggested, I don't think. They were very unlucky not to beat Meath with that late controversial goal. They went close in a couple of other games. So they're better than the league table suggests. And Meath, it's hard to know because they lost their last 2 games of the league. 2 big games. There was a lot on the line, the potential to go up, and they were soundly beaten in both of them. So they've sort of ended on a bum note and losing one of their best players. So momentum wise, you probably think, well, Kildare and Offaly at the moment are arguably best positioned.
I would say Louth are Donnchadh
sorry, we didn't mention Louth there, but Louth.
I would think Louth, they've been to the last 2 Leinster finals, they've survived Division 2, they beat Meath without Sam Mulroy, as you said, Conor Grimes, Craig Lennon, who was so good for them last year. They have those players to come back in. They have, developed a few players that are, they've expanded their squad. They have a lot going for them, and I think they're entitled to feel.
They are the second
best team in Leinster. I've no doubt about that.
In terms of players, like, is there anybody who has kind of sprung to sort of national acclaim that you weren't expecting? I saw Philly McMahon on Saturday cited Stephen O'Hanlon from Monaghan as being one of the best players he saw in this year's league.
Then Stephen O'Hanlon is around a while because he made his debut against Dublin in the year that they were bidding for 5 in a row, and obviously succeeded in 2019, the first league game, and he was dynamic that day when he came on in Clonus. Monaghan actually beat Dublin in that first game. So Stephen O'Hanlon has been around for a while. He has moved in and out of the team. He has a basketball background. He has gone back to that from time to time, but now he's fully locked and loaded with Monaghan. And
he works in strength and conditioning too. So
he's a really, really fast and agile player that with the space that's opening up for these players, he has come to the fore really strong. Very, very good player. A lot of pace in the Monaghan team. But he appears to me quicker and more agile than anybody. He is a handful.
There's like, we were obviously, when the new rules came in, everybody was putting out their own theories as to which kind of player this would suit. Whether it was the big man on the edge of the square, or the good man markers. But is there a case to be made that a Stephen O'Hanlon or a Sean Bugler or say a Ryan McHugh, the player who can kind of break that line, are going to be actually the most important players in the championship this year?
I would probably argue that Sean Bugler is the player of the league, even though Dublin aren't in the league final and someone may have the game of their lives in the final. But Bugler has just been terrific as a ball carrier, breaking the line all the time. Early on, Ryan McHugh was fulfilling that too. He was really, against Kerry, he was magnificent that day. In breaching the cover. So yeah, the 2-pointers, the kickers, the Shane Walshes. Shane Walsh he's thrived in it. The big man on the edge of the square, that hasn't really worked. It hasn't.
Homer had a great little period there against Dublin.
He did, but I think teams are well used to closing the space that close to goal. I think that is a priority to probably to be able to smother that type of player. So I don't think that has really worked. I haven't seen too many marks where players would have actively gone after them. That hasn't really. That's probably in terms of adaptation to the rules. I thought there'd be more of that. I thought there'd be quicker kickouts off the tee. That hasn't really happened. But the line breaks and the 2-point, that movement around the arc, the players, they're the most suitable to that. And Bugler has been really, really good in this league.
Yeah, on that, Donnchadh, so again, David Clifford is one of the best kickers in the game, one of the best kickers ever, and theoretically he's twice as valuable if you put him outside the arc, notwithstanding his goal threat inside. Con O'Callaghan was out trying to catch kickouts yesterday when Dublin were under a bit of pressure, but again, if he gets the ball into his chest with 1 or 2 defenders to beat, he's a great goal threat. Michael Murphy, we're not exactly sure. Where what's the best position of those players now?
I think you've seen managers, because it's so new to everyone, I think you've seen managers try a bit of everything. Like you mentioned Con there, Coola used them in a very similar way. When the game was on the line, say against Coolera Strandhill in the All-Ireland semi-final, which I covered, he was inside, but he came out because that's where he was needed and wanted. So it's because it's such a different game. I think they're going to be used in different ways, and we've seen the wind have we ever talked about the wind as much in a league campaign as this one? And you've seen how much the wind has dominated both the conversation and games. So it's almost like cricket, where a team at half time were basically declaring a total, and the team with the wind in the second half were going to chase it down. So I think it's a horses for courses sort of selection. I think if you're playing with a strong wind, are you more likely to see David Clifford out the field? Probably, yeah. But I think you put your marquee players where they can most influence the game, essentially, and that's going to be where, and that's where you're going to send them. So you see it with everyone, and Connor's a good example of that. He'll be inside if the game is going a certain way. I think you'll see him inside. If it's going away from them, he'll be pulled out. Yeah,
you made the point, Colm, that if Ergil Kieran hadn't made the All-Ireland final, there's a fair chance Tyrone would be going for a league title now. You could make the same point, and Derek Hanavan is obviously just coming into form now. He scored 1-3 yesterday. It was brilliant. Con O'Callaghan was out for the same period of time. Clifford was in a different situation, but the same. Are we just sort of, are those guys the fellas that we might put in our top bracket of inside forwards? I know they all have their own circumstances, but are they kind of gearing up now for the championship, where they're going to get more ball, more space, and become more prominent than they even have been in the last few years?
And the weather conditions will improve, the pitches will get better, and those players will thrive, because the game will be that bit faster, and it will require faster decision making, and those players inevitably make the best decisions. And David Clifford, with ball in hand, just superb. Some of the layoffs, some of the simple, subtle layoffs that he delivered yesterday. He knew he was drawing those players. Con O'Callaghan is the same. They just do the right thing with the ball. Derek Hanavan too. They all have it. I probably said Derek Hanavan and Rory missing, because obviously they missed the first few games. Dublin are probably better equipped to replace Con O'Callaghan than Tyrone would be on the inside line. Even though they have players coming there much younger, you still have Cormac Costello and you have Colin Basquel, and then you had Luke Brannock, and you have Ross McGarry, players that have been around the league for the last few years. They're able to step in. Obviously you're not replacing Con O'Callaghan, but you're doing a better job than maybe Tyrone can do in replacing the two Canavans. So I would be certain they'd be in the league final now, given how close it is at the top. But the better players, what we're going to see on faster ground, it's almost frightening, I think, some of the score lines. If we're seeing 324 in windy Salt Hill, where the pitch isn't great now down there at the moment, I don't know whether you saw that. it's fairly marked at the moment. So that doesn't allow for the flow that you would get in the summertime. Yet 324 to 219 is the scoreline. Where is that going to be in the summer?
Yeah, just to tie it all together this weekend, like I call them fairly superfluous league finals. They probably are in the grand scheme of things. But Croke Park, there's going to be 2 games Saturday, 2 games Sunday. Like who's going to kind of skip down the road after winning their final, and who's going to slump away from Croke Park with their confidence dented if they don't win?
Well, it's superfluous, but to Wexford in a Division 4 final,
sure, and Limerick,
that's something, and Limerick, and Offaly coming to Croke Park to play Kildare, their neighbours, their Midlands neighbours. They're big deals. Can't say how much it is for Monaghan and Roscommon. Nice one to win, but I don't think. But for Offaly and even Kildare needs something. They need a foothold. A Division 3 league final gives them that. So it's a bigger deal the further down you go, which is why the league finals are probably worth keeping for those counties, because they're not going to be winning, probably not going to be winning a provincial championship. Their best bet after that is a Tailteann Cup. But this is the competition that they have to target. So this is a staging post for a lot of counties. Obviously, as you go up the division, there's bigger aims, and that's where it loses some of its relevance. But for even Division 2, Division 3, Division 4, it means a lot, and that's why it's worth keeping. And it's another occasion, and you don't want to chisel away everything in the season. There's already been a lot compacted. You don't want to strip away anything more. Find a couple of weeks break. There is an opportunity now to stretch out the championship by an extra week. I think there's common ground on that. That has been strongly mentioned by Tom Ryan, the Director General. I think even Jarlath Burns would push for 2 weeks. But even if you got 1 week, and with the new format next year, there's another week. There's one less week in the championship. So there's 2 weeks you can play around with. If the pre-season competitions are gone, you can always start the league earlier. Just stretch it out a bit more and create that bit of space and give a little bit of relevance back to the Division 1 final. If they're not really targeting or they're reluctant to really get to the final, just change it around that. It's no harm to have at least 2 weeks, possibly a third week of separation between league and championship.
Donnchadh, anything to add?
Yeah, I think like if there was an extra week around, the only decision would be is where you put it. So are you giving it between the league and the championship? I'd be in favour of putting an extra week between the 2 All-Ireland finals. I think I've said it here before, but we came in here last Monday after the hurling final, after an absolutely brilliant hurling final that ended in drama with a jersey pull and all that, and we were recording our All-Ireland football final pod. And that's because there was no time for the hurling final to breed. So I do think the calendar really squeezes the life out of the 2 hurling finals, which are these great sort of cultural events in the country. And it's all done in 7 days, and it's just if there was a spare week, I would start there just for the sanctity of the finals alone.
But there is 2 weeks, so you can provide 1 week gap between the All-Ireland finals and 1 week gap between the league and the championship. So you can do that.
We used to have 3 weeks, but between the 2 finals, there was the first Sunday to the third Sunday. See, effectively, had the whole month of September was about the All-Ireland finals, and I just think, because they're such significant things, 7 days is just not enough time for the 2 of them.
I wouldn't actually put it between the last round of the qualifiers and the quarterfinals. I think I'd leave a week if you're down the losers route.
That's your punishment
next year. Yeah. That's your punishment. You only have a week to recover. That's it. You win your games. You get the breaks.
I think that's us. So that's it. So the 4 divisional finals will be on this weekend. And then we're pretty much straight into it. The following week, we have a full programme of championship games.
You're going golfing.
I'm going golfing. But more importantly, tomorrow Michael Verney will be reunited with John Milan and Eddie Brennan for some more passionate hurling chat. And you can find that show on all of our podcasts on the Indo GAA podcast feed. Just search Indo GAA wherever you get your podcast, and you'll find Milan and Eddie and Pat Spillane and Dick Clerkin as well as Verney. So that's us. Thanks, Colm.
Thanks, Conor. Thanks, Tony.
Thanks, Donnchadh.
Thanks, Conor.